Hi, my name is Rick Butz. Welcome to Woodcarving. I'd like to introduce you to today's project with a boat ride on Blue Mountain Lake. This boat I'm riding in is an Adirondack guide boat, and later in my shop we'll be making a miniature version along with an Adirondack guide. This particular boat was built in 1886 by a boat builder called Old Man Graves, who lived in the village here. At first glance, it's easy to mistake a guide boat for a canoe, but they're entirely different types of boats. For one thing, you notice I'm not paddling it like a canoe, but I'm rowing it with oars. The old guides found this was the most efficient way to propel a boat through water. Now, these old boats would literally cut through water like a fish. That's because the hull is much more streamlined than a canoe's, and they're much lighter in weight. A 13-foot boat like this only weighs about 50 pounds. And that's all wood, no plastics in this boat. These white cedar planks the hull is made of are only 3/16 of an inch thick. The ribs are cut from the stump of a spruce tree near the root so that the grain follows the natural curve of the boat. This gives you your maximum strength. In a boat like this, there's over 1,500 brass screws and 4,000 copper tacks to hold it together. No wonder it took a 6-month Adirondack winter just to make one. These boats represent one of the highest level of fine old wooden boat construction. They're especially developed by the guides up here for use in the Adirondack wilderness. You see, the natural lakes are really the only way to get around. The woods are so thick and hard to get through. So they needed a boat that was light enough to carry from one lake to the next. And yet it had to be strong enough to carry 2 or 3 men, all their camping gear, a couple of dogs, plus any game they might have shot. And this is the boat they came up with. Boy, just look at the beautiful lines of this hull. It's like a piece of sculpture. These old guides had a very efficient way of carrying these boats. They had a carved wooden yoke that was curved to fit over your shoulders, and then it just fit right in at the balance points of the boat here. You just tie it down to hold it in place. So then all you had to do was just lift the boat up and carry it on down the path to the next lake. So this is the Adirondack guide boat. Let's go back in my shop and make one right now. And here's our finished guide boat. Isn't that neat? The thing about this particular carving is it's much simpler than it looks. See, because we make a lot of these different pieces individually and then fit them all together. And that way you get to work with a maximum strength of the wood grain. Here's some of the patterns that I've drawn out. The boat patterns I've made from a blueprint that I scaled down from the original boat. And you notice that when we're doing this, I've got the grain line drawn out on here. So you want to keep the grain running the length of these pieces for the maximum strength. And same thing with these pieces here. This is for the guide. And on the arm, you want to keep the grain running lengthwise down the form for strength, and the same with the leg. That will make each of these parts very strong when you put them together. Now, these are the pieces that after they've been cut out on the bandsaw. Remember to make 2 arms, so he doesn't have a 1-arm guide. Now the trick that you might find helpful when you're cutting out the boat is to draw out the profile and the top view. But when you cut it out, cut the profile out first. So you have something that looks like this. And then redraw your lines for your top view and cut that out. And that way, when you're cutting this out on the bandsaw table, you'll have a flat surface for the boat to rest on when you're cutting. And when you get done, you'll have something that looks like this. And I've just gone ahead and drawn in the cockpit area on how that will work out. Now to carve this out, I've taken and modified a bench hook here. Remember the other day we're using a bench hook, a flat piece of wood that hooks over the bench and it's got a stop on the end? On this one I've gone one step farther, and I've just tacked a couple of pieces of wood here to hold this boat in place so it doesn't slide around. To carve that out, we'll need some gouges, and I think what I'll do is start out with a couple of number 9s, and let's use a little curved gouge here too, that'll help. And to carve that out, just take your number 9 and start digging into it. Remember, the number 9 refers to the sweep number, which is how big the curve is on the tool. And the larger the sweep number, the more wood that tool is going to take out. Flip this guy around, come at it from the other side. You can't go all the way across on this because then you start running against the grain. So I found it works best to take it in halves. And don't worry about being too neat here. We're just roughing out the rough shape of this. See how quickly these tools work? Very efficient design. Just take that away. Now for doing the end, we'll use a spoon gouge. Remember, this number 9 is a straight one. But the spoon gouge has got a little bit of a spoon-shaped curve to the end. And that's handy because I can take and just work that right down here and scoop out the ends. Now, a straight gouge couldn't do that because when you got down to the bottom, it would stick into the wood and you wouldn't be able to go anywhere. Come around this way. Do this end. You don't want to bring this down too deep. Try to figuring leaving at least a quarter of an inch of wood around the hull. If you bring this down real deep, then when we shape the outside of the hull, you might get too thin and have some holes. Now just clean this up with our number 9. See how easily that takes that wood out? I'm going to use a bent tool here. This is a number 5. And that means that it has a little bit less of a curve to it than the others. And it takes out less wood and leaves a finer curved finish here. This curve shape is handy because I can get down in here and scoop it out. But I don't need as much of a curve as with that spoon shape. I'm always amazed at how quickly this work goes by hand. These tools are so efficient, and they're so much fun to use too. It's really a nice feeling with this tool going through the wood. I think that's pretty good. We can finish the rest with sandpaper later. Now for doing the outside, I saved that for last. So I'll have a flat surface when I was carving the inside. I'm going to put a little block of wood in here to brace this boat. Now I can start on the hull. I'm going to begin with a number 9 gouge again. And I'm going to just kind of come along the bottom here. See, these guide boats didn't have a keel like a canoe. They just had a little flat section along the bottom. And these old boat makers knew that that was enough to keep the boat traveling straight in the water. Oops, going against the grain there a little bit. When you feel the tool starting to dig in there, just turn it around and come from the opposite direction. Now I need a larger tool to shape the outside of that hull. I think I'll go with a large number 2. And this is almost a flat-shaped tool. And it's great for just working along the edge here. The beauty of these boats was the streamlined shape of the hull. They don't really know who invented the design for the Adirondack guide boat. They think it was just these old guides who managed to put these together and experiment with trial and error until they came up with the most efficient design for going on the waterways. And they're really very fast. One of the things the old guides used to do to keep their skills in shape was they'd have races with these boats. And they still do, and they're a lot of fun to watch. Sometimes they'll have a race where you go out and you'll tip the boat over at a certain point on the course, and then bail the water out of the boat. You can do that by jerking the boat back and forth, and you can actually bail the water out while you're in the water with the boat. So for this race, they'd go out and they'd swamp the boat, and clean the water out, get back in the boat, paddle back to the finish line, and see who can do it the fastest. My father-in-law used to do a lot of boat racing in his younger days. His last race he was in was kind of a funny experience because they had all these people lined up at the starting line, and mostly there were a lot of younger folks who were very athletic and very strong and raring to go with this race. And Dick was getting along in years then. And a lot of these people thought, well, this guy's going to have a little trouble with this course, and maybe he's not going to make it. So as a joke, they gave him a lantern in case if he didn't get back before dark, so he'd be able to find his way. And the starting gun went off, and these people just started thrashing and just making a lot of waves, and everyone trying to beat the next guy out the starting line. And Dick was just kind of rowing very slow and steady. And they just left him in a cloud of dust, so to speak. But the thing is, on these boats, see, these old guides, the old-timers, they knew the rhythm, and they knew how to row them for maximum efficiency. And so what happened was at the end of the finish line, everyone's lined up on the beach waiting for these boats to come around, ready to cheer in and see who the first athlete was that made it across the line. And here comes Dick, rowing around the corner, still the same slow, steady pace. Not another boat in sight. And he gets to the finish line and gets out of his boat. And then way down across the point, you see these other boats coming. They're still thrashing and rowing away. But the secret was in the rhythm of how you did it. Okay, this is about as much as I think we need to take off now with the gouges. And for the finish work, we can just do that with a knife. I think one of the records in the Adirondacks for a guide with a boat was a grandfather of a friend of mine. His name was Ernie Blanchard. And in the early 1900s, he rowed a guide boat from Paul Smith's in upper St. Regis Lake to a place called Hunter's Rest on Racket Lake. Well, that's a distance of 72 miles. And along with that 72 miles, there was 6 miles where you had to carry the boat to get between the waterways. And he did the trip in 13 hours. And I don't think anybody has ever duplicated that time. Now for the finishing touches, usually on most of my carvings I like to leave the tool marks in. But on this one, because the shape is so neat, I'm going to use some sandpaper to smooth this down. And if you want it to be an authentic Adirondack guide boat, then you have to use garnet paper, because that's in a town called North Creek up in the Adirondacks is where one of the few places in the world where they still mine garnet and make the old-time sandpaper. Garnet's a semi-precious gemstone. It's the state stone of New York State as far as that goes. And that's why the sandpaper has a nice orange look to it. It's actually the color of the garnet crystals in it. When you get this all smoothed down, this is what your boat's going to look like. You have a nice, sleek-shaped hull. Beautiful little boats, just beautiful. Now for carving the guide, we'll use this block of wood that I cut out. And I usually start carving the legs first and start at the bottom and work my way up. And that seems to work pretty well. I'm using the whittling stroke on here, and this is, remember, where you brace your thumb against the block of wood and then just slowly close your hand and draw the knife to you. Remember, I'm not pulling my hand with a knife like this. That's not very safe. Now to carve the boot, just take and make a series of score lines down around here. See, most of the guides wore old leather boots or a combination of leather and rubber, much as they still do today. So you want to make sure we have the right footwear on this guy. And this way of carving gives the impression that the pant legs are tucked inside the boot, which is what they would do so they didn't get their feet all wet or their pant legs all wet when they're walking around through the water. And that happened a lot up in the Adirondacks. The lakes are great to travel on. Unfortunately, they're not always connected by nice, navigable streams of water. And a lot of times they'll have to carry the boats from one place to the other. Now in Canada, they call these carries portages, after the French word portage. But in the Adirondacks, they always call them a carry. So you just keep shaping around there until you come up with a boot that you want. And when you get that done, you're going to have something that looks, well, a little bit like this. You want to bring it down to about that fine. And then later we'll glue that in, and then it'll give them a stance. And for doing the head, we'll be using the same technique that we used the other day when we were doing our Adirondack hermit. And this is a style of carving that in my family dates back to the Bavarian mountains and the Black Forest. And we just start by rounding off the shape of the head here. Okay, this is really as far as we need to go at this point on the head. Now, to do the face, the way to start is take out and just sketch in about where his hairline is going to be. We'll give him a nice shaggy hair here. He's been out in the trail for a long time. And let's give him a full beard too. We'll bring that around like that, and I'll come around like so. Now to carve that out, I'm going to use a V-gouge, which is over here. I think this is where I put it. It's always nice to have a variety of different tools to use. And these V-tools are especially useful. And I'll use this tool to shape around his hair. Now look at the technique that I'm using when I'm using this gouge here, okay? Notice I've got my thumb braced against the wood, and I'm just doing it with my hands, just moving it a tiny bit with my hand. Now if that slips, that tool isn't going to go anywhere because I've got everything contained right here. It's braced right against my thumb. And I'm not taking it with my hand and pushing it like this, because that way if the tool slips, it's just going to keep on going and hit whatever it gets in its way. But it's like the whittling stroke we did. You just brace your thumb against that and shape that around. This is how they carve in Switzerland, up in the Bavarian mountains. They use this technique. I had a chance to study with some master carvers in Brand, Switzerland a while back, and those guys didn't even touch a knife hardly. When you get the shape of the beard, you can kind of trim that down. Just come around there. Now the old photograph that I used to model my guide from, I don't know who it was. The photograph just said unidentified guide. But some old friends of mine tell me that he looks like an old guide that used to be around the Blue Mountain Lake area called Mossy Maxim. And I've heard a lot of interesting stories about that guy. I guess he was a Cracker Jack rifle shot and everything else. Okay, now, to begin detailing the face, we'll cut a notch for the eyes here. And make that notch about halfway between the top and the bottom of the head. And don't make it real deep, just going a ways. And then 1/4 of an inch below that, we'll start making another notch, and this will shape out the nose. See, and the reason we do these notches first is it gives us a shape of the profile. And that's how you identify these people. When you look at a person, it's easiest to identify them by the shape of their profile. So start with a notch for the eyes, and then the nose, and then you're halfway home. We use a little pointier knife for this. To do the nose, take a very thin, sharp-bladed knife with a point, and just incise a line down either side of the nose. And just pare away a little of the wood on the cheek here. There you have it. This folk style of carving is really fun to do, and you can get so much expression with just a couple of tools. Turn them around and pare down the other side of the cheek. Remember, the secret to doing this is you've got to have a sharp knife. I mean, the point of that knife has to be sharpened right up to the tip. Otherwise, instead of cutting through the fibers of wood, it'll tear them and rip them up. Now for doing the eyes, once again I'll hold the knife in a pencil grip, and I'll just make a little line for the bottom of the eyelid, and once again I'll just score a little line for the top of the eyelid here. And then you take the flap side of your knife and just pare out a tiny little chip. See, that's why your knife has to be sharp. Same thing, I'll just whittle out a little chip. That chip is so thin you can see light coming through it. So you don't have to go very deep with that, just a little wood will do. Then, to make the pupil, I'll just take and cut down vertically with a very small triangular incision. And pop that out. This is like the chip carving we were doing the other day. And that gives us the shape of the eye. Then just do the same for the other side and detail around the beard. And when you get done, you'll have something that looks like, well, it looks something like these guys over here. And to texture the hair, once again, you just take your V-gouge and incise a few lines along through there, and that'll give the appearance of a nice shaggy beard. For doing the clothes, the collar of his shirt, just take the V-gouge once again and incise a line around there. Then take your knife and cut that away. That's what I love about these carvings. There's so many things you can do with just the same basic technique. There's so much variety. When you get this done, then you can put it all together. And what I'd suggest using is 5-minute epoxy glue to glue these together. Now, first thing you want to do is glue the leg on. And the 5-minute epoxy, well, epoxy glue, it comes in 2 tubes. You just mix it together, and then you can hold that there while it dries in 5 minutes. So I start with a leg, and then, see if I can get all my pieces together here. You glue the yoke to the back, and the yoke is just carved out of a little piece of wood here. That fits on his shoulders, and you glue that there, and then glue that to the boat, and that'll be like so. And then you take the arms. Now these arms I just whittled out, just using the same little whittling techniques and a V-gouge to shape the hands here. And those will fit on his shoulders here. Sometimes it doesn't always line up just right. You may have to take a knife and do a little paring away on the inside edge of the arm so it fits just right. And then just glue that and hold it into place. Take the other arm, do the same thing, and then glue him down to his log. And to get him to balance, you may have to want to pare away a little bit of the bottom of the log to level it up so he sits just right. The other thing we'll need, oars. Let's put some oars on this guy and just whittle those out of a little piece of wood. And these oars fit up over the yoke up here on the boat. And you just slip those in there and they'll stay in place. And oar locks. That's another nice little touch. And these I've just made out of a piece of brass that I bent around with a pair of very small needle nose pliers. And once again, you just put a little 5-minute epoxy on there, stick it on, hold it until it hardens, and that's all there is to it. The one thing I want to mention on the log is this piece here is a piece I found out driftwood on the lake, and I think it's a piece of beech. But the important thing is keep it about 4 inches long, and that'll give you a nice steady base on here so that it doesn't tip over. And that's really all there is to it. I know it's one of these projects, when you see all these pieces, it looks really complicated, and it's, oh dear, a lot goes into it. But I'll tell you, when you put them all together, you have a piece of work that looks so much beyond the work that went into it. It really is a spectacular little carving. Anyway, that's all there is to it. A piece of Adirondack history for your home. Next week, I'd like to show you how to do our Swiss-style country chair. And I'll be showing you how to make the legs and make the seat and put it all together and do some chip carving decoration around it. A lot of fun and a great little place to sit. Well, I want to thank you for dropping by. I've had a lot of fun. And until next week, this is Rick Butz wishing you happy carving.
How to Carve Wood, a book of projects and techniques by Rick Butz, is available by calling 1-800-950-WMHT. With more than 200 pages and over 400 photographs and illustrations, including patterns for some of the projects in the series, this companion guide presents important woodworking techniques. For your copy, call 1-800-950-WMHT. The cost is $17.95 plus handling. Please have your credit card ready when you call.